Hi, my name is Kevin Thomas, W1DED, and this is Q5 Ham Radio. Today I'm with Tim, N3QE. Tim is on his way to Florida to participate in the Florida QSO Party, portable from a Parks on the Air park, and I'm really excited to hear his plans. Tim, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Kevin.
So tell me a little bit of the background. I know you've operated portably before. You've been down to Florida before. Tell me that background and what is leading you to go back.
My overall background as a contester. My activation last year in Florida QSO Party was my first ever Parks on the Air activation. I learned a lot by doing it. This year, I'm looking to do some things better. Last year, I did it with very little advanced planning. I just took some wire and a radio and stuck it in a bag and made it up as I went along. This time I'm doing it with a little more planning. A lot of the planning extends outside of ham radio into things like camping, which is not something I would otherwise do.
So let's back up, though. You live in Maryland. You went to Florida last year. So what excited you about making that trip to Florida last year?
Well, it lined up with a conference I was attending in Miami. I noticed the coincidence, hey, Florida QSO Party's the weekend before that. And I managed to make up some, I scheduled my flight to leave on Friday instead of Sunday. And I managed to secure a campsite. It was a really fun experience. I remember that activation better than I remember anything else I've done in Florida, in fact.
So since you remember it so well, tell us more about it. What did you take with you? How much preparation did you put into it? And what were the results like?
I did almost no preparation. I figured out there was a coincidence between my forum there and the Florida QSO Party, literally Thursday. I changed my tickets to leave on Friday. Then I had to start putting things in my luggage on Thursday. One of the constraints was, I wanted to pack so it would all fit in a carry-on. I brought my FTDX10, which is a nice little radio. I also brought some various pieces of coax and 12-volt power wire and some alligator clips to hook up to the car battery. I ended up bringing almost everything I needed, and what I wasn't able to find was a 24-foot painter's pole that I picked up at the Home Depot in between the Miami airport and the campsite, and a couple other little things that I was able to pick up at the hardware store on the way.
And did you know beforehand which park you would go to?
I figured that out while I was sitting at the airport on Friday. I was looking around for campgrounds. I learned a couple things. In Florida, the end of April is kind of in between the two tourist seasons. There's a winter season and there's a summer season, is what the pros tell me. And the end of April is at the end of the winter season. It turned out campgrounds were readily available. I just had to, figure out which ones were summer and which were winter. That wasn't obvious to me. I'm sure somebody who's familiar with Florida tourism knows the difference.
And what were the results?
The results were amazing, in part because I activated Parks on the Air, and I listed my activation with my call sign in the Parks on the Air website on the way down there. I ended up getting calls from folks who weren't necessarily on for the Florida QSO Party, but were instead Parks on the Air activators. I think that boosted my QSO numbers by 10 or 20%. Results, sort of happiness-wise, is, wow, I get, instead of being, I got to be away from everything. Being at a campground in the Everglades, I was dozens of miles from the nearest electric pole. There was almost no noise. I was very happy with my antenna setup. I had previously done some kind of vacationing activations, trying to use a vertical as an antenna. This time around, I used a inverted V hung from the painter's pole. That turned out to be just incredibly productive. And finally, I learned a lot about propagation in the southern end of Florida. The southern end of Florida is really a magic place on the high band. 15 meters and 20 meters were just incredibly productive during the day. And I managed to get some results on 40 meters in the evening, too.
So, Tim, you're well known in the contesting world. You're a member of the PPRC. I don't think there's a contest that you don't get on and participate at some level. And you're certainly known as Tina, which we can get into in a while. But Parks on the Air, what is your Parks on the Air background?
Almost none. Like I said, I figured out, hey, I could activate, and hey, maybe I can combine that with the Parks on the Air, since I would have to find some place to activate from. I mean, I certainly hear about it. PVRC has had a fair number of members in the past 5 years join. They had been introduced to contesting as a result of Parks on the Air activations. And they decided to take it up the next step or combine the two by beginning to become a more serious contester. And almost everything I learned from PVRC meetings talking to them.
So now I want to talk about 2026 and your plans next weekend. but I feel as though I've put Tina out in the world, and not everybody may know who Tina is. So explain Tina, and then we'll get back to the storyline here.
Tina was actually Tina had been previously used back in 2018 or so when I was in Florida, but remotely operating my station in Maryland. Is that complicated enough? For a North American QSO party, I was with my son on a band trip to Disneyland, and I figured, hey, I'll set up my station for remoting, but I don't have a good audio connection from the hotel back to my shack. So I decided, N1MM has the ability to play synthesized wave snippets, and I made some wave snippets, and I used a female voice. And for that NAQP, I was Tina. I went several years without using it. And then last year, for some reason, in WPX phone, or in the build-up to WPX phone, I began putting more effort into it. The voice synthesis technologies have advanced substantially since I had done it in the 2010s. I used an AI voice model called WaveNet and a commercial provider. In this case, it was Google's text-to-speech to pre-synthesize everything in SuperCheck partial and all the serial numbers that I would have to give for WPX. Every contest have different exchanges, but a serial number exchange is one of the more challenging ones. And the result was a much more natural sounding than the previous snippets, which were just letters and phonetics kind of strung together that I had previously done in the 2010s. I decided to jump into the deep end of the swimming pool, and I began entering phone contests, at least, first some little ones like the North American Sprint SSB. And finally, I did, in 2025, I did the WPX SSB contest using 100% voice synthesis. Never used a microphone once. I put a substantial amount of effort into pre-synthesizing every phrase that could possibly matter for contesting, and it turned out very well.
Well, I was very impressed. You gave me a couple of contacts while I was at ZF2KT, and I've got to say that it was very smooth. There wasn't a lot of hiccups. There wasn't the delays that you sometimes see with AI, so great job with that. I'll need to have you back to talk more about Tina. Let's get back on the storyline here. So you're packing, this time you prepared. What have you prepared for the Florida QSO party?
I was so successful last year with the 24-foot painter's pole that I picked up at the Home Depot in Florida that I'm going to do the 24-foot painter's pole again. But this time around, instead of just hanging inverted V's from it, I'm planning on a 3-element inverted V Yagi. So there will be the main elements, and there will be 2 other, guy strings. Doesn't take much to hold up lightweight wires. And then suspended from those guy strings will be V elements for the reflector and director. Fortunately, if you're in Florida and you're working a largely domestic contest, you don't have to turn the beam a lot. So sitting there in Dade County, I'm going to be pointing northwest, and I don't plan to ever have to do anything to turn the beam. I'm also, in my 2025 activation, I had to hang up different wires. I just brought some wire with me. I figured it was long enough to make dipoles for each of 10, 15, 20, and 40. And I was right, but I had to bring the whole pole down. And then I was using split nuts to attach different lengths of wire and then re-raise it. That was a little awkward. There's going to be a little more preparation in that. I'm building the wire Yagis in my backyard right now, just to test out and check out how they work. Additionally, I have my own improved center insulator. Let me hold it up. This is a 3D printed center insulator. It's got a ballon. It even has a lid. It's not obvious why I need a lid. And to facilitate attaching the wires, there's lugs where a clip can attach. That will hold the individual wires or the guy strings. And rather than using wire nuts every time I want to change the connections, I have little power pole plugs that will accommodate switching out the wires more conveniently. Band changes still won't be easy on the fly by any means, but I hope to sort of change the entire process to make it as smooth as can be, considering I'm taking down and raising up a new Yagi each time.
So how often do you think you'll be making band changes?
That's a good question. There are buddies, contesting buddies who are on for the contest, and they'll want to walk me between the different bands. Last year, 15 and 20 were just incredibly productive during the day. 10 was just barely productive. And after sunset began, 40 was great. 40 was great. Those who are really serious about it know that, they can stay on and get me on 10, 15, and 40. Sorry, 15, 20, and 40. But maybe just a temporary dipole to help people work me on 10 when they ask for a move to 10. In Florida QSO Party, mults aren't per band, so there's not an incredibly strong incentive to try to move folks to other bands. At the same time, the guys who are very serious about Florida QSO Party is a very thoroughly attended event. The guys who are really serious about it will be asking me for moves, and I'm thinking that they'll find me on 15 and 20 during the day anyway, but maybe just a temporary antenna for 10. Maybe I don't have to build a wire beam for that. That might be a way to accommodate them, and it doesn't have to be very high. That's my hope. Let's see how productive we can make 10 be.
So, Tim, this might be a good opportunity to talk about the dynamics and the rules of Florida QSO Party. Just run through dates, times, point structure.
That's a good question. I do know Florida QSO Party has a substantial benefit for the CW contacts. And of course, if you're on CW, you get spotted on reverse beacon almost instantly. In order to make it clear that I'm not in Maryland, I was signing N3QE/4. And that's a very strong sign to anybody that, hey, Tim's not in Maryland. We better check him out because it sounds like he might be in Florida. So there's the mults are counties. For people outside Florida, mults are counties. Dade County has a very big population, but it doesn't necessarily have all that many hams. So Dade is certainly a desirable county. It's not the most common one in the world. At the same time, it's not so rare that it requires a rover to go activate it. The Florida QSO Party strongly, while I'm doing it at Parks on the Air activation, they strongly encourage, and like I said, the activation of rare counties strongly encourages rovers to visit multiple counties and announce their plans in advance. AD4EB gave an absolutely phenomenal talk at Contest University on that. That was one of the best talks I've ever attended. Heavy CW, the exchange is, I give Dade County. I expect the other guys to give me their state. And that actually worked out very well with the Parks on the Air folks who worked me too. They knew what park I was in because I had listed myself on the Parks on the Air website. I had a function key that would send that if they wanted me to confirm it. Almost naturally, they would give me back their state. Which was what I had to lock. So I didn't usually have to prompt them for what their state was. So it's got a very easy, lightweight exchange. That's a big point for a state QSO party, that it's easy to enter.
So tell me more about the Parks on the Air intersection. I understand the spotting. POTA has a phenomenal website for spotting. Are you primarily focused on that advantage that gives you, that you will basically be encouraging other Parks on the Air hunters to find you?
That's part of it. Self-spotting is sort of a tradition in the Parks on the Air world, which is great. However, self-spotting is not compatible with most contests. In most contests, self-spotting is strictly forbidden. However, the fact that I've pre-listed my activation on the Parks on the Air website, that doesn't give out what my frequency is at any point in time. That means that when I get picked up by when I call CQ and get picked up by reverse beacon on CW, that will be relayed on to the Parks on the Air website, and I'll be listed as a Parks on the Air activator in their summary of spots. They sort of take a subset of spots and do that. Then after that, I am likely to get some manual spots. One thing about spotting, you spot to give a clue to other contesters that, hey, there's somebody here to work. You should get on and work them. It's also kind of a way of bragging. Hey, I've worked this guy. So that sets up that spotting dynamic. Having other people spot me sets up. That's a very healthy thing for contesting and Parks on the Air activation.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. I've done a fair amount of Parks on the Air activations myself, as well as hunting stations, and I would say 90% of the time would, after a QSO, spot them. It's just a courtesy that often happens within the Parks on the Air community, so I think you're absolutely right. Go back again to how people respond, how Parks on the Air people respond to you running a contest. You're suggesting that they're already giving the exchange somewhat. They're giving their state. Tell me more about that.
I came back and at a PVRC meeting, there was somebody who wasn't necessarily a biggest contester, but was a big Parks on the Air searcher. from his home, and he said, "Tim, that was you in Florida, and what were you doing down there?" And I said, "I was on for the Florida QSO Party." I didn't even know the Florida QSO Party was on. He told me. So a lot of the Parks on the Air guys working me don't even know that there's a state QSO party on at the same time. They're watching the POTA websites, they're watching the POTA leaderboards. That's one of the things that contesters have in common with POTA, in that we have our scoreboards and for real time in contests, and we have our score listings. They have their leaderboards. I don't know the full world of their leaderboards. I've explored a little. There's 100 different ways you can get listed on a leaderboard. That's a very healthy thing for both contesting and POTA, and something they have in common is encouraging on-air activity, and at least the fun competitive aspect of it is there for both of them.
Tim, one of the things I've certainly learned firsthand when I'm operating portably, redundancy is really important. You just don't want to be, in your case, several states away and not have everything that you need. Do you plan on having backups?
Not substantially, no. I'm flying down there. Everything has to fit in my carry-on, plus a couple days worth of clothes and supplies to get me back. So there's not going to be, it's not like I'm traveling with 3 rigs and doubled up pieces of coax and extra power supplies. I got a radio. I trust the radio. I've got a very mechanically simple antenna. If I had to do some mechanical fix, I could fix anything on it from with parts from the hardware store and a pair of diagonal cutters. And my power source is the same car as the rental car I'm driving. I'm not driving 2 rental cars to the campsite. I'm driving the one rental car I have. So no, there's not a lot of planning like that. I've also been a WRTC competitor and talked a lot with WRTC competitors. That's a different situation. They're traveling to another part of the world, sort of like me traveling down to Florida. It's not that different, but they're traveling to another part of the world with everything they need to build a multi-2 station. Very often they will, take N+1 sparing. So that, they know they need 2 radios. They'll bring a 3rd spare. They know they need 2 laptops for logging. They'll bring a 3rd laptop. I can see that. WRTC is a little bit bigger deal. If for some reason I have a hiccup while I'm in Florida, I'm going to address it on, as best I can in Florida. One of the disadvantages of this Parks on the Air site, this national park I'm visiting, the campsite's dozens of miles from the nearest hardware store. But I don't envision that to be a problem because I'm going to arrive on Friday. I'm going to make sure everything works on Friday. And I'll go ahead from there. One thing that's new to me is being that far away from civilization. I mean, I commute through downtown Washington, D.C. every day. That's my natural environment, where if I need a bite to eat, I just get off at a subway stop and there's a place to eat at the top. Okay, it's very different in Florida. That's something I have to adapt to. And if you're in the Everglades, I got to adapt to that.
So, Tim, I don't think you've mentioned the park that you're going to. Where are you heading?
It's the big Everglades, Everglades National Park. I have a campsite there. I'm not going to give too much details about the campsite. There aren't that many. It's a campsite that you can drive to and set up a tent at. And there are rules about raising antennas. My antenna is the 24-foot painter's pole is strapped to the picnic table that's already there at the site. I got wires that run off into the bushes. You have to be nice they do. There are some very tall pine trees at the campsite I'm visiting. However, you're not allowed to hang anything from a tree at a national park.
And tell us when the contest will start and when we can expect to hear you on the air.
Florida QSO Party is the last weekend of April, the last full weekend of April. That's April 25th and 26th. It starts at noon on the 25th and runs into the evening. Activity starts largely on 15 and 20 during the day, and that evening is the only overlap of the Florida QSO Party with darkness. So the last couple hours of, which is, it runs to 0200Z, which is 10 p.m. East Coast time. The last couple hours of where there's darkness in Florida, that's when 40 meters becomes super active. It's also running the next day in the morning. It wraps up in the late afternoon before it gets dark again. So 15 and 20 during the day, 40 as soon as dusk hits, That's the big plan.
So somewhat of an unusual contest in that it is not a continuous number of hours.
That is true. There's a number of contests out there. For example, there's several Ready contests that run in 3 8-hour segments over a 48-hour weekend. That's sort of a concession to the fact that they aren't worldwide ready. There's not genuinely 48 hours of activity, and people, they're trying to fit their real life in on that weekend at the same time. I think that works out well. For the Florida QSO Party, I don't want to say that they constructed it around rovers and necessity to, sort of get some rest before you get up the next day and start roving again. But it certainly has turned out to be very conducive to rovers. Again, I'm not a rover. I strongly recommend anybody visit AD4EB's website, view his talk on Contest University 2025, their YouTube channel. The roving is just an astonishing corner. Sometimes people ask me, some people heard I was going to Florida and I was thinking about activating for the QSO Party, and they assumed I was going to be a rover because that's so very interesting. Man, driving from Miami Airport through downtown Miami to the suburbs and then finally to the campsite, I can't imagine driving any more than that in a weekend. That was enough for me.
Well, I concur with you. Jim, 84EB, is certainly impressive. And he was just on with the contest crew just in the last 2 or 3 weeks. So anybody who's interested should also check out that particular video. But he's also enlisted his wife's help to be driving. He's got a team and definitely a system that he's perfected over time. Really amazing.
His talk was phenomenal. I knew he had his act together, but I had no idea the effort that goes into getting your act together that way. I was amazed. You got to watch AD4EB's Contest University talk.
One of the things that I find really exciting is that there's so many different ways to contest. I certainly enjoy talking to Chris KL9A and Dan N6MJ, and they're contesting at a world-class level with fantastic stations. But then you talk to Jim, and he's found his own niche where he's incredibly competitive and very good at it. And even what you're doing, going down to Florida for the Florida QSO Party, operating portably. I've got to say, I'm enthused by your enthusiasm. I sort of want to get on a plane and head down to Florida that weekend because I can see how excited you are to do this. Tim, do you have any goals in mind, or are you just going to do the best you can?
I'm going to try to do better than last year. That's always my goal in any contest, do better than last year. We are subject to the vagaries of the solar conditions. All that said, the southern end of Florida in any domestic contest is a truly magical place. And I discovered that when I was there. And, I could work here on the East Coast. If I'm on for a 15-meter contest, the first skip zone, is somewhere in the Midwest. But if you're in the southern end of Florida, the first skip zone is like South Carolina or North Carolina. So there's so many more states and so many more people you can work. It's very exciting. Again, my goal is to learn how to build wire V-beams and how to put them into use. This time around, I'm going to do some practicing at home, building the antenna and setting it up. It's very hard I discovered it's very hard to screw up an inverted V, but I have to see how hard it is to screw up an inverted V beam. It's going to be very interesting operating this time with the beam pointed northwest.
Tim, I really appreciate you joining me. Before we wrap up, are there any last thoughts you have for the audience?
State QSO parties and Parks on the Air is a wonderful intersection. I'm approaching it from the contesting end, but so many folks are getting into contesting as a result of doing Parks on the Air. The dynamicism of the two working together is wonderful.
Well, Tim, good luck. I'll be looking for you. I'll make sure I get on the air, at least from Maine. Unfortunately, I don't think I'll be able to get on a plane and head out of Florida, but I'd definitely be looking for you. I appreciate you joining me today.
Thank you. Thank you.
My name is Kevin Thomas, W1DED. This is Q5 Ham Radio. I've been talking to Tim, N3QE. Look for him last week in April at the Florida QSO Party. It'll be his voice and not Tina's voice this time around.
No, it'll be Tina. It'll be Tina.
I stand corrected. Tina is going to Florida with Tim. Remarkable.
Yeah, that way I don't even have to bring a microphone. Again, it's all about packing.
I love it. Thanks for the correction. So thank you, Tim. Thank you, Tina. 73.
73.